Hello, guys. Welcome back to another episode on the show, Control or Be Controlled, a podcast designed to help you start thinking differently and take control of your life. And I remain your host, Darlington. Today's guest is Douglas Squirrel, technology executive, leadership coach, and co-author of Agile Conversations. With over 40 years of software development experience and more than 2 decades leading technology teams, Squirrel has helped organizations around the world transform the way they communicate, collaborate, and solve problems. After making what he describes as every mistake in his book, as a new CTO, he discovered the power of better conversations, an approach that has since helped executives turn technology from a cost center into a driver of business growth. Class, welcome to the show.
Hello, very nice to meet you and very nice to be here.
Okay, thank you so much. And I hope you enjoyed that introduction.
Hey, I wrote it, so I think so, but I've got to update some of it. I'm much older now, so I think I've been coding for a half century. I feel old.
All right, so you have said you made every mistake possible as a new CTO. What were some of the biggest lessons from those early years?
Well, I'll tell you the one that's most salient now, especially in the age of AI and remote working and so on. It's telling people what you're about to do. And, I imagine lots of your listeners drive cars. And when you're driving a car, what you do not do is just move your car in whatever direction you want to go. You do things like have turn signals and indicate where you're going to go by going into the correct lane. And those kinds of ways of signaling other people are things we seem to forget once we finish driving and we get to the office. And sometimes, I had a client who had an employee who went off and ran a project to replace a major technology system and never told anybody else. And one day they all came in and said, "Hey, why does this look different?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, that's the replacement." Nobody had heard about it. You can imagine that didn't end very well for that employee. That was not a good way of signaling. So I did a lot of failing to signal. And although I never went to traffic court, I did go to CTO court and got in a lot of trouble and learned a lot about how to give signals that are effective so people aren't surprised by what you're doing.
All right, thank you, Douglas. So, what is action science, and how did it completely change the way you lead?
I'm sorry, I missed some of that. Say it again.
What is action science, and how did it completely change the way you lead?
So action science is this thing that a friend of mine dug up out of old social science articles and papers and books in the 1970s by a guy called Chris Argyris, a very clever academic. And the problem is nobody can read what Chris Argyris writes. And I'm not sure why he called it action science. I mean, he could have called it lots of things. So he had a very academic approach. But it turns out that the methods of action science, which involve practicing your conversations, improving how you speak, and being, for example, more visible, more transparent in the way I was just describing, those techniques translate really well for engineers because the science part means that there are rules and steps that you can follow. And us engineers, we love those. Salespeople, not so much, right? Customer service, they're more in the moment. Us engineers, we want to plan out what we're doing. And that's why often we're not as good at conversations. But the book is full of techniques and tools from action science, which are step-by-step ways to have better conversations and therefore better outputs. So if you're talking to technology people and you want to get them to do something, there are methods for making that very explicit and clear. And if you are a technology person and you can't figure out what those crazy business people are talking about, there are tools you can use, practices you can practice that will help you get there.
Okay, that's wonderful. I've never heard about that before. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So, why do you believe better conversations are the foundation of high-performing organizations?
Well, I see a lot of low-performing organizations because they come to me and ask me to fix them. So I've got a lot of experience with both sides of that equation. And a common theme that I'm sure your listeners will have picked up is that if your organization isn't performing, it means it's not achieving some goal. Maybe your goal is increase your revenue. Maybe you want to go into a new market. Maybe you want to launch a new app. There could be lots of different things that your organization wants to do. But at the end, there's something that didn't happen. And if you trace back all the way to the beginning, again, I have a different client that's doing that right now with something that they had to scramble to do this summer. And they're doing a timeline and an analysis and a postmortem. How is it that they didn't start this in April when the executives thought that they had got it started? And what happened is a bunch of missed conversations, and they're writing down each one that they missed and practicing so that they can improve. So over and over again, when I do these kinds of postmortems with teams, I find that at some point, the original problem was that some humans didn't talk to each other. It wasn't an AI bot. It wasn't that Claude screwed up. It wasn't that somebody didn't have the right process, although all of those things can happen too. The original problem is that somebody thought they were supposed to work on A and they actually worked on B. Or somebody gave instructions for doing X and somebody else actually did Y. And that's the fundamental problem that happens in human organizations because humans are bad at communication if we don't practice.
So you think humans have to practice conversation?
Sorry, say it again. I missed part of that.
You said humans are bad at communication, so if we don't practice. Is that what you said?
I said humans are bad at conversations, and I think you're asking about process. The process is something that helps make sure the humans do the right thing. But if you have a great process, you have a great method, you have great tools, and you have humans who are directing those tools in the wrong way, you will just build whatever it is that you're trying to make, but you build it wrong.
So how then can humans be directed in the right way?
So, for instance, one technique I talk about in the book is briefing and back briefing. And this isn't my idea. This comes from a chap called Bungay, who wrote a great book on how this is used in military organizations. But it applies just as much in technology organizations and others where you want exactly what you're describing. You want to make sure you get the right output. What you do is you describe to someone what their limitations are, their guardrails or their constraints. You describe to them what their freedoms are. It's okay if you do it this way or that way, or you change this part. And here's the overall goal. And then this is the crucial part people forget. People are pretty good at doing those. They do OKRs and objectives and management tools and things like that. They have all kinds of mechanisms for telling people what to do. But then there's no checking. There's nothing that comes back to say, well, what did you actually accomplish? And so, for example, I will teach technology teams to demonstrate their progress every single day or every single week so that somebody can say, hey, wait a minute, that thing you're only 1% done with, it's completely wrong. Stop now. And you save 99% of the time and effort. That's the sort of thing that people should be doing in order to make sure that their communication has actually worked. Not just communicate, but also check that the others are actually acting on it.
Okay, thank you so much. Because I think communication is only communication when the other person is acting on it. All right. So you often talk about productive conflict. What does that mean, and why do so many teams avoid it?
So if I were to come on this podcast and tell you, Darlington, your podcast is really terrible, you don't ask the right questions, you do a terrible job, this is a bad podcast, you would probably not change your podcast. You would just say, hey, that Squirrel guy, he's a jerk, and you would not listen to me. That would be an unproductive conflict for us to have. But if I came on and I said, Darlington, I have an idea for you. It may be painful, but if you did this thing differently in your promotion, you could double your audience, and I'd like to help you with that. you might disagree with me. You might say, oh, wait a minute, I don't want to change that. I love my podcast the way it is. And you might not come to the conclusion that's the same as me, but we would have a productive discussion. We would have an outcome that would be valid and valuable for both of us. And that's the sort of thing that I too frequently don't see. I had an executive telling me just yesterday, oh, I have a great relationship with so-and-so. We get on really well. We never have any arguments. I said, that's a bad relationship. You should have productive arguments in which you each bring a different point of view, and you don't have to agree at the end. You don't even have to be friends at the end, but you do have to have a productive result for the business. And far too many folks either have that kind of low conflict, low value interaction with others, or they have high conflict, low value interactions, which are unproductive in the way I illustrated first.
Okay, so moving on, how can technology leaders stop being seen as a cost center and become strategic business partners?
Well, the first thing is you actually have to tell the technology people what their strategy, what the company strategy is. And far too many companies have this kind of abstract, very high level notion that might be sort of carved on the wall somewhere. We're going to make the world a better place. But concrete strategy, like we're going into a new country, or we're going to drop this product line and buy another one, those sorts of things are not shared. And so the engineers in the basement often, are kind of sidelined. And although they have lots of contributions to make to that strategy, they don't know what it is. Now, the fault is not only with the executives. Those technologists should come out of the basement and they should wander around and say, what are we trying to do? Why are you asking me to build this for you? I can't count the number of times I've come into a technology team and I've said, why are you building this? And they'll say, oh, it's a ticket that I got. I say, why do we need the ticket? Oh, well, because so-and-so asked for it. Why did so-and-so ask for it? Dead silence. They have no idea what the value is of what they're building and whether there'd be something of higher value, whether they know a trick that would allow us to not need that thing and therefore we could go live 2 months early. The amount of disconnection between technology and strategy is gigantic at most firms. And so if you can bridge that gap even a little bit, you're going to make huge strides. And if you're a technology person, you should be asking. If you're an executive, you should be telling and having a dialogue with your technology people all about strategy.
Okay, so you have worked with more than 170 organizations worldwide, right?
It's actually up around 450 now. So I think you have an old one there. I've got to update the intro. But yeah, I work through lots of folks very quickly. I get in, I help them fix their team, and then I get out.
So can you tell us what separates the most successful teams from the ones who are not successful?
Now, that's a really good question. Well, it would be kind of obvious if I were to say communication. And I always find that people say, oh, yes, we have a communication gap. We have a communication problem. Then they don't do anything about their communication. So let me sharpen that some. What I find is that nobody knows what anybody else is doing. And that happens in tiny organizations just as much as in huge ones. I've got a tiny, very wealthy, very, very successful organization. Doesn't want to grow. They're already making a ton of money per employee. But they are restricted in growing even further because over and over again, people who sit next to each other in the office, this is an in-office company, there's not even much remote work, people who sit next to each other don't know what the other one is doing. And the habit that I think people have got into and things like Slack and overuse of email and these kind of remote-only asynchronous mechanisms promote this. People don't have any kind of high bandwidth interaction that allows them to discover something new that they wouldn't know to ask about. And so the least well-performing organizations tend to be the ones in which there's lots of silos, lots of isolation, even though people might be really close together physically. And the highest performing ones sometimes are completely remote. Nobody has ever met anyone else in person. They're scattered around the world. But their level of knowledge about what's happening, even in distant corners of the company, is very high. And so if you have that kind of ubiquitous knowledge, then you're in a whole lot better shape to have the productive conflicts we were just talking about.
Okay, so Moving on, how do leaders build trust while still holding people accountable for results?
Sorry, I might have missed the first part of that. Try it again.
I say, how do leaders build trust while
Hmm.
still holding people accountable for results?
Well, the first thing is stop holding people accountable. And this may be a language barrier, so in different languages, these words mean different things. But in English, or at least in Britain, hold accountable is a phrase you use when you want the other person to hide under the table. And there's a pointing finger that's kind of floating around, and if it points at you, you're going to be zapped and thrown out the window or something. And hold accountable has a blame element to it. That's why it has that kind of negative feeling. So what I'd much rather leaders do is allow people to give them an account and then give them feedback on it. Now, let me describe that in more detail. As we were talking about before, let's suppose the leader has given the strategy and the direction, the constraints, the freedoms. Then what you want is frequently, like in technology, I want the technologist to show you results, show real working code, show you the first version of the feature, even if it's ugly and not quite working yet. Very, very often, once a week, once a month, once a week, once a day, very, very often, they come back to get feedback. They are giving an account. Here is what I've done in the last 2 days. The report is here, but it's blank. It doesn't have any data in it. But you can tell me whether I have the right columns. You can tell me whether I've titled it correctly. You can tell me whether I'm delivering it to you the right way. Tell me if I'm on the right track. And like as not, they're on the wrong track because they've misunderstood something, and they can correct. So, and that, of course, builds trust because the leader cares, obviously, is checking frequently, is getting information. The leader or their proxy, the CEO doesn't need to check every line of code, but certainly somebody who is in a position of some authority needs to come along and say, you have built this the wrong way. You're not in trouble for doing that. I'm not holding you to account. Don't hide. But what I want you to do is shift gears now. Head this other direction, build it this way. Don't build a report, build a screen, whatever it might be. And if you can get your employees giving you that account frequently, they feel safe to do so. And if you give them helpful feedback, you will have an awful lot of trust with them very quickly.
Okay, so thank you so much, Douglas. So, what inspired you to co-author Agile Conversations, and what is Agile Conversations?
So Agile Conversations is an application of that action science that we talked about earlier on. And it's an application specifically to agile teams, which is just a fancy way of saying engineering teams that use modern methods. Agile has come to mean more or less writing software in the standard way. And Agile Conversations came about because Jeffrey, my co-author, and I were studying those old dusty textbooks from the 1970s with all this kind of academic language. And we kept finding gold. We kept finding great things for building trust, like we were just talking about. Great techniques for sharing the motivation behind what you're doing, for asking better questions. Seems very simple, but most of us ask terrible questions. You've been asking me very good questions, by the way, but most people are not good at that skill. So we found a lot of those pieces of gold, and we wanted to share them. So we wrote them all down with lots and lots of exercises. So the best way to get the most out of the book is to actually get a piece of paper, fold it in half, and write down two sides of a conversation. What you were thinking and what actually happened. Those are the two sides. And when you get the disconnection between what you were thinking and what you actually shared, you start to see what you could do better. So that's a tiny taste of what's in the book. But the idea is that you can use these old methods that have been tried and tested in academia, and they actually make a huge difference in your technology and other organizations.
All right, so what do you hope readers take away from the book?
Well, I hope they take away the idea that practicing is good, that they should try working on their conversations. Now, you're practicing all the time because you're doing these podcast episodes. I do a podcast too, and that's one way to practice conversations. But you can also do it deliberately, kind of like a martial arts practitioner will deliberately practice over and over again the same move so that they get better and better at kicking in a certain way. So you can actually practice your conversations. Bots are great for this, so AI is really helpful in this area. And if you practice a lot, you'll actually start to ask better, more open questions. You will start to build trust more effectively. You will have greater accountability. but it is a practice. It's like learning to play the piano. You can't just look at the piano, watch a few videos on piano playing, and become a concert pianist. You have to do practice every day in order to get better. And that's the message of the book, really.
Okay, thank you so much, Douglas. So, if every leader listening to us right now could improve just one conversation this week, where do you think they should start from?
Oh, great question. Boy, you're asking really good ones. I would say the highest leverage conversations, the ones that have the most effect, are the ones with the people that have the most power. So, for example, if you're a CEO, you could have a conversation with one individual contributor and shift how that person is working. That's a valid thing to do. Nothing wrong with that. But you asked for what has the most effect, what has the most value. I would say, why don't you talk to the top leaders, the top executives in your organization at the boardroom table with everybody from every area and help them to have better conversations. Maybe you could talk to your investors. They often have a lot of power. Maybe it's your most powerful customers, but you want to get to the people who will have the most reverberating impact by taking what you're saying and using it elsewhere. So if you apply these techniques to your highest value, highest impact conversations, you'll get even more out of them.
All right, Douglas, thank you so much. So I was wondering, do you prefer Douglas or Squirrel?
Oh, most people call me Squirrel just because there are lots of people named Douglas and not many named Squirrel. But you can call me
Oh,
either one. I don't mind.
okay, thank you for joining us and sharing your insights on leadership,
Sure.
communication, and building stronger teams. This conversation reminds us that lasting organizational change doesn't begin with better technology, it begins with better conversations. All right, so Douglas, is there a question you wish I would have asked you that I have not asked you?
No, I don't think so. You asked really good ones that I wouldn't have anticipated. That's why I love doing this.
Okay, so before you go, how can my listeners connect with you and
So
learn more
listeners,
about your work?
absolutely. So the best place to go is douglassquirrel.com. So that's DouglassSquirrel.com. I have to remind people that there's only one L in squirrel and two R's. People sometimes mix that up. But if you go there, you will find my telephone number, my home address. I like it when people get in touch with me and ask me questions because I like having conversations like this. You'll find free material, booklets, ideas I've shared, hundreds of podcast episodes, lots and lots of fun stuff. And I'd sure love listeners to join my community, participate in events I run, and subscribe to my newsletter. And all of that is at douglassquirrel.com.
All right, thank you so much, Douglas. Once again, this has been a very exciting episode. And I encourage my audience out there, you are a leader, want to become a leader, an aspiring leader. Make sure to listen to this episode, share it with someone out there who might need this as well. And make sure to check out Squirrel's work, connect with him as well. Thank you so much. And honestly, we'll be looking into getting agile conversations. Thank you, Squirrel, and have a wonderful day ahead.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day yourself as well. When will this come out?
So I'll let you know when the episode is ready, and I'll add the link to Podmatch.
Perfect. And you send it to me and Laura, my assistant, who you set this up. She will help make sure it gets promoted and everything so that we can help you too.
Okay, so also tell her to confirm episode has completed and leave me a review on the show on Podmatch.
She will do that for me, I'm sure.
Okay, all right. Have a wonderful day.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye now.
Bye.